Advance the slides. Okay, we're good now.
Okay, thanks. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much. Hey, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Obviously, this isn't the best of nights, but we really appreciate you coming out. Most of you know me, but my name is Matt Gillis. I'm the Varian Environmental Project Manager. Before we continue, I'd like to just point out that this is being recorded, and when we're done, we'll broadcast it or we'll upload it to our project website. I want to thank, again, everybody for coming out. I want to thank the political representation that we've had support from over the past couple years, both at a regional and local level. I also want to thank members from Mass DEP who are here tonight, and those that are not as well. Excuse me. Most importantly, I want to thank the members of the community who have stayed involved in this. And we have a lot of work going on at the site, and we're going to talk about a lot of that work, and we have even more coming up. But before we get started, I want to just take a minute to introduce, and again, many of you have met these folks before, but just as a reminder, the core technical team and consulting team, these are the folks that are really coordinating the huge effort that is this project and the different remedial strategies. So starting on that side, I have Project Director Laurent Levy, Senior Project Manager Raymond Carteret, Thermal Remediation Expert Jason Cole, Senior Technical Advisor and Chemical Engineer Carol Mauder, Senior Community Outreach Specialist Amy Brand, and Independent Licensed Site Professional Matt Hackman, who's in the very back. Real quickly, I just want to take this public opportunity to congratulate one of the members of our team who is a brand new grandfather, Raymond Carteret, as of yesterday. Okay, so on the screen here, you can see the primary purpose of this meeting is to provide an update based on some of the many documents that we've submitted since our last PIP meeting, which was in November. And they're on the screen there. And before we do that, I just want to refresh. Can you go to the next slide, please? I want to refresh everybody's memory on the site. For those of you that do not stare at these site maps every day like we do, the different subject matter experts are going to be talking about treatments for these different, we call them source areas. And we're going to be starting with the Building 3 area, which is at the very north of the site. And Building 3 is where we're implementing thermal technology. If you go a little bit further south, it's called out here, but it's actually...
Matt, for simplicity, show the highway. Because you can't see
Sure.
it.
Right, this is Route 128. So this is Plan North is up here.
Hey, look at that.
Thank you.
So I did have a pointer and it doesn't work on a screen, an electronic screen, so sorry. But I'll try to do this. Go ahead.
So Building 3, and I want to point out that Building 3 is part of the CPI operations. This is an active manufacturing site. The bedrock treatment area is right here. Just below that is the Building 5 source area, again, another part of CPI's operations. A little bit further to the south is the open field area. We call this PSL 10 source area. If we go down gradient, so this is the way groundwater flows. If we go down gradient along Tozer Road, this is where we're going to be implementing the permeable reactive barrier. Carol's going to talk to that. We like to call it the catcher's mitt, because what that's going to do is it's going to catch and immobilize contaminants as a result of thermal. And then finally, down there is the Stream A seep area. And this was the area where we actually already completed our remedial approach down there. And Raymond will walk us through that in a few minutes. The next part of our presentation will be these folks going through those different areas. After that, Laurent is going to give us, excuse me. Yes, thank you. So Laurent's going to walk us through the temporary solution statement, which was submitted in February, and he's going to tell us what that means to the site, both now and moving forward. After that, he's going to talk about the remedial action release abatement measure. It's written right in front of me. the release abatement measure completion report, and this summarizes key components of site treatment that have already been completed. And so Laurent will talk about that. And then finally, Laurent's going to give us some background on an upcoming submittal, which is an IRA, which stands for Immediate Response Action Plan. This is going to be submitted in the coming weeks. And what this is while we were in the process of thermal construction at Building 3, in the soil outside, while they were drilling some wells, they encountered some asbestos-containing material. This was in the way of some asbestos boards. It was very localized, but there's a regulatory process since we found that. And Laurent will talk about that. And then finally, Amy's going to brief us on the updated public involvement plan, which was submitted last month as well. And as we always do, we'll leave time at the very end for some questions and comments from anybody who has them. So I'll turn it over to Jason.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. So it's been a while since we met in the PIP format, and back in November, and there's a lot of things that have happened since then. I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of speaking and meeting with you in some of the TAG meetings. So some of this information may be repetitive, it may be an update, you may have seen it before, but as part of the process, we're going to carry it forward, and then we can run through details afterwards with questions as respect to thermal treatment. Let's go to the next slide, Amy. So just to recap, Building 3 source area, this is the facility that's located up along 128 on the northern portion of the site. This is one of the, probably the largest and the most major source area within the property associated with the environmental restoration. Two technologies are coming forward to be applied in this particular remediation area: in situ thermal treatment, which we've talked a little bit about. We're currently in the process of constructing this equipment and system components, and then in situ bioremediation,
Sorry. Go ahead.
which will follow.
Go ahead.
Which will go ahead and follow the overall thermal processes. As by means of an update, the system is working through the design phase. We specifically set apart two different design tracks, one to get stuff going in the field initially, and then following up with the supporting process operations. That's on track. We started operation and started field construction activities in December of 23. So we've been out and drilling since then. If you've been in or around or by the facility, you've probably seen some activity on the northern face of 128 or the eastern face, which kind of backs up to Whole Foods. These are really the only areas that we have access to currently, but we're in the process of installing subsurface infrastructure in those areas. You have a photograph here of some of the welding operations on the back of a drill rig. There's a whole series of photographs that are out on the posters, and we can talk about some of the other activities that they're taking care of as part of this operation, but all typical construction operations. As part of this overall, we continue to work through power. We're working through, as Matt indicated, the identification of asbestos-containing material that happened outside. So looking to manage some of these construction findings and carrying things forward. So Laurent will talk a little bit more about that in some of the subsequent slides. Just to recap kind of what we're up against with respect to the source area. At this point in time, we're drilling in three areas: area 1, 2, and 3 in the blue. And hopefully you can hear me. This is not picking everything up. Oh, that's okay. Picking up the three source areas in the blue, and this represents the outdoor areas that we currently have access to. Area 4, the stockroom, we actually have to move the tenant CPI, the owner's operations. And what you see down here in the lower photograph is the new space where the stockroom operations will be moved into. So this is taken a couple of days ago. This build out is ongoing. There was a major amount of renovation and repair and restoration work that took place within the CPI facility, and lead paint abatement and asbestos floor tiles and all the other things that you find in a 50-year-old building. So we're moving ahead. We're in track to have that stockroom cleaned out and transitioned over to the new area by the end of the month, which will allow us to start drilling within the stockroom area sometime around the start of May. There's a lot of drilling that needs to take place inside of the building, and this space is, basically a space that's kind of around us here. So if you do have an opportunity to see what's taking place in those drill rig photographs, picture all of that stuff operating indoors. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be taking place and a lot of construction operations. And with that, let's go to the next slide and kind of wrap up the thermal update. Current status, we're drilling 23 had started on schedule. We've encountered a bedrock at a bunch of varying depths. It tends to be undulating a bit more than initial investigation predicted out there. It's not problematic to the technology. The equipment that we have designed is capable and certainly appropriate for heating in the subsurface. And then some of the infrastructure that we're installing out here down in the lower left-hand corner, this is a drill rig. This is actually facing the Whole Foods. 128 is straight into the building to the north, set up and operating with a vertical bore. Some of the photos out on the poster show the angled borings and some of the differences that are associated with those rig setups. And then I kind of backed up here, but this photograph over here on the right-hand side is a plan view of looking down. There's a lot of utilities that are present in the subsurface, and before we put anything into the ground with respect to drilling or subsurface operations, we want to know what's there. So all these areas have been excavated by a soft digging technique, basically a giant vacuum cleaner sucking soil and dirt and material up into it, so we're not putting digging implements into the ground. And what you can see here are a bunch of utilities and fiber optic lines and stuff that obviously if we hit with a drill rig we're going to do damage to, and we can't do that. We can't have that be part of the overall construction system. So to date we've post-holed and potholed all of these investigation locations or subsurface construction locations, and continuing on with the drilling. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Carol. She's going to talk about activities and an update for Tozier Road and PSL 10, and go from there. Thanks, Carol.
All right, so we'll start out on Tozier Road. So as Matt mentioned earlier, this is the catcher's mitt, and eventually what we'll be doing is the injections of the colloidal activated carbon and zero valent iron to provide that trap and treat, if you will, as the contaminants flow down. There's not a risk in this area. I just want to refresh everybody's memory on that. But as we are doing things in the source area, we know that when you start vibrations from drilling and things like that, you can mobilize some contaminants. So we want to make sure that we have this catcher's mitt set up, so if anything does mobilize, that we've got treatment. So we've been doing some investigation along Tozier Road. The investigation, if you want to go ahead to the next slide. So the investigation has been from the post office all the way down to 32 Tozier Road, which is the biolab. Okay. And we've completed all 29 locations, and the sensors that we're using give us information on the lithology as far as how much water can be moved in that portion of the aquifer. And simultaneously, we get information on does it look like there are significant concentrations of the VOCs that we have present? So we've got these sensors and that data. We've completed all of those locations along Tozier Road. The next step is we're going to be going out and doing confirmation sampling. So we're talking to drillers to go out and collect some groundwater and soil samples at select locations, so we can have that information and really calibrate what those sensors are telling us. So we're at about I don't know if we're going to be out there in a couple of months or so to get that, a couple weeks to get that additional data, and then we'll be able to proceed more with that design. So, next slide. And so this is PSL 10, and this is the subgrade biogeochemical reactor, or SBGR. And as a reminder, what that is we'll be excavating some soil in the area, backfilling it with a treatment media, which is a combination of mulch, zero valent iron, emulsified vegetable oil. This is where we want to add some lobster shells and some other things into this media. We'll have extraction wells, and we'll recirculate it through there. And then we get this reactor. It starts actually in the SBGR itself, but then it extends into the groundwater, and we get a nice reduced biological activity that's going to be degrading the contaminants there. So it's a combination of excavating contaminants in the soil, treating the groundwater as it goes through the reactor, and then extending that reactor further down gradient towards the extraction wells. We're at the 60% design stage. I'm reviewing our basis of design report right now. Next slide. So this is an update with the 60% design. Things have moved a little bit from what we showed you before. At one time, we had talked about having an up-gradient extraction well up in this area, but what we've done instead is we've extended the excavation to go a little bit further in that direction, and we've put all of the extraction wells on the down gradient side. We'll be excavating down to the water table, which could be up to 15 feet below ground surface, doing the backfill of the media. Then you put in the gravel, the pipes, and then you also put some soil, clean soil cover on top. Just like Jason showed you a picture of the utilities up in the Building 3 area, we also have utilities all through here. There's some water lines, electrical lines, and with that, our design had to be adjusted, and that we've got to have a shoring system that's going to go right here. So it's going to help, when we excavate, we want to make sure that we're not going to be destabilizing any of the soils around the utilities. So there'll be a shoring system, and the other areas will be sloped back with the excavation. And that's it.
Could you just reorient us on where PSL 10 is?
Yep. So this,
Just repeat the question.
so the mayor asked if I could reorient as to where PSL 10 is. So unlike some of the other areas, it's not like a set building, but we saw when we did the soil gas survey, these green spots are where we did soil gas sampling. We saw our highest concentrations right in this area. So this is the area that we're going to be excavating. Groundwater contamination, though, extends further down gradient, but this is the actual area. So it's, again, it's not a specific site, it's just an area that we've observed the highest concentrations are.
South of building.
Could we see the prior slide?
Could you get the
that shows it?
poster
Yeah.
that has the map on it? Or Matt will.
I'm
Thanks.
just thinking particularly for later viewing.
Right. We actually meant to bring that in for exactly that reason.
Do you want to go back to the first slide? That's another way we could do it as well.
Get hurt. I'm afraid.
Yep, I'm just trying to move this.
I've got so much going on here. I'm afraid to go back in the slides. We'll get the poster in here.
Okay. Any other questions while we're waiting for the poster?
The reverse button on the slide shows.
Well, okay, let me. All right.
Because that shows it clearly.
Yeah. So it's right in this area. So here's Building 3 where we're doing the thermo. Here's where we're going to be doing the bio, the ISCO. It's at the far southern end of the site.
But by the old softball.
Yes. Yeah, that is over in this area.
Okay, appreciate it. Just
Yep. Any other questions?
We'll hold the other questions to the end.
Okay. Just do it while they're setting up.
Yeah.
So when I say they're having way more fun out there.
That may be blocking some people from seeing the screen. I would just have it. You
gonna put it over there.
Just have it available to hold up as needed. All right. Ron, while we're online is not chatting.
Okay, so next I'm going to give you an update on the Building 5 source area treatment. And just to refresh our memories, the Building 5 area is the one in the middle here. It's an active building with active manufacturing occurring at that site. We'll wait for our slides to get to where we were. There we go.
Sorry.
That's all right. So in this area, we're going to be implementing two different types of treatment. One is an in situ bioremediation and in situ.
Can I ask you just to pause?
Sure.
Because the online is not progressing.
The online presentation got stuck on the phase 4 cover page, and I don't know why. sorry, folks.
She says she sees it now.
Now, that is weird.
Uma Guma.
And they said, why, no sound.
If for those of you online, the reason you're not hearing any sound is because we're troubleshooting for a minute.
So it's moving, but it's slow.
It, as long as it moves, it stopped moving. There was a slight delay. Okay.
So it's moving. Let's go back to Raymond.
You're missing a slide.
It's going to
There
be
you go.
side delay. So it needs to catch up. Okay.
So-
Thanks, everybody.
Sorry about that. So again, I'm in the Building 5 area. There's going to be 2 treatments implemented in this area. The first is in situ bioremediation, which in situ means in place. And the bioremediation part is we add amendments to the subsurface to allow the naturally occurring microbes to break down the VOCs that are placed and something with like vegetable oil. Behind the scenes, we are been doing a lot of work with pre-design investigation that has been going on. That's been constructed or designed. We've met with some drillers on the site, and we're waiting for to get bids back from those drillers, and that work should move forward relatively soon. This is going to involve using some angle drilling where we're going to put fans of wells under the building at different angles to hit different zones under the building, drilling from outside at an angle under the building, as well as some vertical wells. And we'll use test results from these wells to focus our treatment in this area, help finalize what amendments we're going to use in this area as we move forward to actually do the treatment later on. This is an adaptive design that's really well suited for this area because we can focus our treatment in areas where it is needed the most as we move forward. Next slide. The next area I'm going to tell you about is the bedrock area, and this is the area that's located in between building 3 and 5, essentially. And this is an area where we see elevated levels in bedrock. And if we recall from some of our prior conversations, groundwater travels a little different in bedrock than it does in the overburden. In the overburden, it's in the soil particles or in between the soil particles. In bedrock, the water travels through fractures or cracks in the bedrock itself. So it's really important for us to understand the connections of these fractures. In this area, we're going to do in situ chemical oxidation, in situ again, in place. And oxidation uses an oxidant like you have at your home, hydrogen peroxide, but in this case we're using sodium permanganate, which is a stronger oxidant. And that oxidant will react with the VOCs in the subsurface and destroy them. But the important part of it is to make sure that we have connection or contact with the oxidant and the VOCs and the right fractures. So again, a pre-designed investigation is going to be implemented in this area. We're going to install some vertical borings that'll go down into the bedrock, and then we're going to do some real-time tests to look at those fractures and see, well, which fractures are contaminated and how are they connected so that we can make sure we inject the permanganate in the right zones to hit those fractures with the contamination. And based on the results of that pre-design investigation, we'll then finalize the volumes, locations of some additional wells that may be needed to treat the different fractures as we move forward. Next slide. Lastly, the last area we're going to give you an update on is the Stream A area where we installed the carbon core mats. And as Matt indicated earlier, this is in a location where we've already implemented this approach. We're in the monitoring phases now, where we go out regularly and after storm events like this and make sure there's no erosion around those mats. And all those events have shown that there is no erosion that is affecting the performance of the mats. They're providing the design intended as the mats. In addition, when we did install these mats, we installed one shallow well right behind the mat. That well was sampled just after we installed it. Those results were in that most recent status report that was provided to the Mass DEP and is available for looking. We also sampled the surface water upstream of that mat and downstream of that mat, and compared those results to the prior results, and they're very similar. So what we're seeing is that the mats are in place, they're providing the protection for those seep areas, but the surface water concentrations haven't changed upstream and downstream of them. We'll continue to do that groundwater monitoring at this new well. We've only sampled the well once, and then also sample those stream points as we move forward and continue on. Next slide. So lastly, I just wanted to go over some of the system installation schedule that we have. We've talked about a lot of stuff very quickly, and these were all updates that were provided in the status report, the Phase 4 status report that we sent out for public comment and that we're presenting here tonight. As Jason indicated, the implementation of the thermal treatment system is in progress right now. That's moving forward. We expect the next one to be implemented will be the PSL 10 area, that reactor that Carol spoke about, and then that will probably be followed by the barrier itself, the installation on Tozier Road. This is an estimated schedule. Things do come up, but this is where we feel we are now with the program that we are advancing forward. And with that, I will turn it over to Laurent if he's done with his chores. I don't know what you're doing.
All right. Apparently, I have the boring portion of this presentation. So, part of the reason we're here today is to present our temporary solution statement, which we submitted to DEP in February 2024, to indicate that the site meets the requirements set in the Massachusetts contingency plan for a temporary solution. So what's a temporary solution and how different is it from a permanent solution, you may wonder. So a temporary solution is a professional statement from a licensed site professional, Mr. Hackman here, to an LSP to indicate that the site does not currently pose a risk, but that treatment needs to continue to achieve a permanent solution. And so in lay terms, it means the site is safe. We're not done. We need to do a little bit more. And even though we do not have a permanent solution right now, we anticipate that we will achieve this permanent solution once the remedy is fully implemented and operating. So thermal treatment, the Tozier barrier, and the other source treatment that Raymond and Carol discussed. To meet the requirement of a temporary solution, next slide, we need you to demonstrate that 4 criteria were achieved. So right on the screen to your right. No substantial hazards, control of a contaminant source, control of contaminant migration, and control of the non-aqueous phase liquid where present. And so I'm going to go over each criterion in the next couple of slides. The first criterion to meet a temporary solution is to demonstrate that there are no substantial hazards at the site. So what do we mean by no substantial hazard? It means a level of control for the contaminants so that they do not pose a significant risk of harm to human health or the environment for several years. It's a lower bar that the terms you've used us saying before, no significant risk. So it's a little different than no significant risk. So you may ask, well, don't you say you already have a no significant risk condition? And why are you using this new term, no substantial hazard? And the answer is yes, we have no significant risk, but we need to continue to implement the remedy to make sure the condition of no significant risk continues into the foreseeable future. So that's really the subtle difference. Right now it is no significant risk, but we need to do more just to make sure it stays that way into the future. And That's the reason why we're implementing those remedies that we're presenting you this evening. The second criterion, right here on the screen, is to meet temporary solution, is to show that the contaminant sources have been characterized and controlled. And this was done as part of the Phase 2 comprehensive site assessment, which we finalized last year. That was one of our early PIP meeting that we had. And currently, there are no ongoing sources or release of these chemicals. It's been stopped, and therefore that second criterion is met. Next slide. The third criterion, that's my most complicated part. Third criterion to meet a temporary solution is to demonstrate that the contaminant migration is under control. And so in the temporary solution statement, we present an evaluation of groundwater data from the past several years to demonstrate that the plume is stable. It's not moving, it's not progressing, it's stable. So I'm going to explain what that means. So we can see on the figure to your right is the groundwater plume. The edge of the deep overburdened groundwater plume is on the western side, right here. All right. You see a number of dots. The green and the blue dots represent wells where we did some evaluation of VOC concentration. And at all the location that you see that at the edge of the plume, blue or green, concentration are either decreasing or they are not increasing. So we do statistical tests, and we show in the statistical tests that those concentrations are not moving, they are decreasing. You can see a couple red dots right here, closer to the boundary of the site. These are locations where concentration are increasing. It's not the edge of the plume; it's further up gradient, and we are addressing remedies, thermal treatment here to address this dot and this area. And the PSL treatment, the SBGR that Carol presented to address that other area here. And so with time, this concentration will return to being stable or decreasing. The fourth criterion at the bottom is to demonstrate that non-aqueous liquid at the source has been removed or controlled, and at the moment, there's been no observation of solvent NAPL accumulation in monitoring wells. It hasn't been seen since the 90s, 1997. So residual NAPL, if present, is unlikely to be mobile. And again, I want to add, we'll continue to do source treatment. This thermal treatment and other treatments are going to be in place, and they're going to continue to further reduce concentration at the source, and the plume will continue to shrink. Next slide. So, as part of this meeting, we're also presenting another report. In addition to the temporary solution, we're presenting a release abatement completion report, the RAM report. Sorry, I forgot measure. Release abatement measure completion report, a RAM completion report. Sorry about the lingua. And this report is submitted to Mass DEP in early March. And it summarizes the results of activities that were conducted over the past 6 months to address a certain portion of the site cleanup. So Building 3 and Building 5 soil vapor extraction that are in place, that's in the RAM report. The subslab indication system at a residential property on Longview Drive, that's in the RAM report. Vapor monitoring program at a commercial property on Toza Road, same thing. And the overall groundwater and surface water monitoring program that we do twice a year, it's also in that report. And just a few notes, the sampling data, generally the results of the past 6 months has been consistent with prior data that we've been collecting at the site. So no change that we've observed, no smoking gun. Moving forward, the cleanup and monitoring activities that are documented in this RAM report will obviously continue. We're going to continue to monitor. We're going to continue to operate the SVE system, but they will be merged into a temporary solution status report. So instead of having 2 or 3 reports every 6 months, we'll give you 1 report to review, and this will be the temporary solution status report. And so essentially, we're just consolidating a bunch of things together. And this report will be presented to the public twice a year. There'll be a PIP meeting twice a year. And of course, we will welcome your input and your comments on these. So a little simpler, a little less meetings, and obviously always happy to discuss with you and get your comments. All right, I'm also telling you a little bit about what Matt and Jason alluded to earlier. We are essentially taking advantage of this meeting to let you know we will be issuing an immediate response action plan later this month, so in April. So we'll call this one the IRA plan. And this IRA plan is intended to address the removal of a limited area of buried asbestos-containing material that was encountered while digging to locate utilities near Building 3. So here are a few photos on how it looks like. A little bit right here. This little material that you see here. And it was found east of Building 3 in that area. So fairly limited. During, we were essentially clearing utilities, make sure we were not drilling in those utilities, and that's where the material was found. So we stopped work. We covered it to prevent access. We didn't know it was asbestos at the time, but usually, you know, the team is able to, when something is buried and looks like it's, drywall, it usually means something's afoot. So we stopped work, we covered it, we collected a sample, we sent it for analysis, came back, said it contained asbestos, and at that point we notified Mass DEP as we had to. And once we discover that, we have to stop drilling, so it's remained covered. And essentially, we need to address the removal of this asbestos before we can continue the drilling in that area. So how does this work? What's the time frame from the IRA report that you will see soon? It'll be submitted as indicated to Mass DEP later this month, so within the end of the month. Because it's a special situation, so instead of being asbestos, say, in your basement, it's asbestos that's in soil, we need to develop a work plan that's called a non-traditional work plan, because it's non-traditional ways of finding asbestos. And that work needs to go through review of a specific unit within Mass DEP, so there's the asbestos team, and they need to review and provide comments. So it's a little bit more cumbersome, but, you know, it's hopefully straightforward enough that we should move this along pretty quickly. So it'll be reviewed, this non-traditional work plan, and then once it's reviewed and commented upon, it will be incorporated into the IRA plan that I mentioned earlier, and that IRA plan will be issued. There'll be a public notice. You will get it in the mail. You will get it by email. You get 20 days to comment on it if you have comments, and then we respond to your comments. And then we do the abatement work, and it's not, when I say we, it's not really us. It takes a trained worker to do this. It's a special team of workers that are trained to abate asbestos. Once this is done, we will do the last exterior monitoring well. Meanwhile, you know, drilling proceeds inside the building. So it's not that we're losing a little bit of time, but at the same time, it's not that we're sitting idle waiting for all this to take place. We can move forward with other activities. With that, I will let Amy speak.
I'm the last speaker, so thanks for hanging in. And this will be fairly brief. I just wanted to present, one of the other documents we're presenting for public comment is an update of the public involvement plan. Go ahead to the next slide. Our last public involvement plan was updated in 2022, so 2 years ago. I think many of you know we've been doing a lot in the past 2 years. We're also nearing the end of the required public involvement activities that are part of the phased approach of the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So we wanted to outline what our intent was for public involvement activities going forward. So we captured those in this draft document that's available for your review. I'm just going to summarize some of the things we addressed in it. Some of you may remember we had a discussion at an earlier public meeting about the public information repository at the library. This is all the documents that have been produced for this site. And the library was understandably starting to have some space constraints and wanting to know what could be removed. And we did put that out to you all for some public input. People felt that the majority of those documents could be removed, and they have been. We are maintaining all of the recent phased reports, as well as pretty much anything that we're issuing in the last 3 years or so. So the public documents are still, the most up-to-date public documents are still there for review. All of these documents are available on the Mass DEP website. So that's an update on the information repository. Laurent already kind of mentioned, but our intent going forward for public meetings is to have public meetings twice a year to coincide with, right after we've issued the temporary solution status reports, we'll do an informational public meeting to present that and have a discussion about that with you. We also have, many of you are aware that we have a group called the Technical Advisory Group, or TAG, and those meetings started off monthly. They're really happening closer to quarterly now. And so we discussed with the folks at the last TAG as well, but we're proposing that the TAG would also continue to meet twice a year, basically the other quarters from the public meetings. So we had public meetings spring and fall, and TAG meetings summer and winter is what we're proposing. But also to keep everyone on the site mailing list informed as we're going on in between these meetings, we have started to issue a monthly progress email that is sent out to everyone for whom we have email addresses on our site mailing list. Which brings me, I'm going to actually skip that, to if we don't have your email, we would like to have your email. And I hope you all had a chance to sign in. Mass DEP has actually changed their regulations recently, and it allows us to, many of you, I'm sure, get mail that tells you in 14 days we're having a meeting. You get mail that tells you we've issued a report. We can start emailing those notifications if you give us a permission to do so. So we would appreciate it if you would check the box to say, yes, we would love to get those by email instead. You can also get our monthly progress reports, and those come with a way to get off that list if people don't want the monthly progress reports but want to stay on the regular site mailing list. We issued a fact sheet. I hope many of you had an opportunity to look at that. We issued one in the fall and November timeframe, and we have committed to just keep on issuing an annual fact sheet that's less in-depth than what you get in these meetings, better for the people that aren't coming to all the meetings and just want to know basically what is going on, what are they doing, and we'll continue to issue that annually. We are working with the city on an as-needed basis to do robocalls. This is automated calls that go out from the city to a neighborhood or a certain geographic area. And we do those when there's something specific happening, usually our work out there where people might need to know what's going on. The first time we did this had to do with working along the stream where we were working at the SEEP, and our workers were wearing protective gear, like suits. The reason was to protect them from really dense poison ivy, not from contaminants. And we wanted to make sure that people understood what they were doing and why they were dressed like that. I think we also issued a robocall related to road closures along Tozer Road. And we'll do that, periodically on an as-needed basis. And then finally, we're continuing to maintain and have recently been doing some updates, and we'll continue to do some updates to our website, beverlysitecleanup.com. If you haven't had a chance to go there, I would encourage you to. All of these meeting presentations, the videos, the posters are all posted there, the fact sheet. There are lots of links, links to documents, and we are also using our monthly progress email to update the bullets on the homepage of the website as well. Next slide. So all these things are outlined in the public involvement plan. So that summarizes all the reports we have out for you for public comment right now. So right now, available for public comment is the temporary solution statement and phase 4 status report. That's one document. The release abatement measure, the RAM completion report, and the public involvement plan update. And then, as we mentioned to you, the asbestos abatement IRA will be available hopefully by the end of this month. These 3 documents that are already out, and then the one coming up, will all be available at the public library. They're also available on the Mass DEP website and on our own website. And you can, the 3 documents that are available for public comment now, you can actually, it says April 4th. We'll take, if you want to submit comments when you get home tonight, you can. We'll take them. But there's a 20-day public comment period, which takes us through the 23rd of April. There is a hard copy comment sheet at our welcome table that you're welcome to use. On our website, there is an online one, and it's got a little box you can check of which report you're commenting on. You can submit comments that way. You can send email to Raymond. You can send mail to Raymond. We would love to get your feedback. And I think that concludes our, now we're ready for questions. So I'm going to take questions. Let's talk about how this will work. We do have some participants who are watching online. So I'm going to take questions from here in the room. Matt Hackman is going to run around with a microphone for you. Even if you think you speak loudly enough for people here in the room to speak, I'd encourage you to use the microphone so that folks online can also hear you. For folks who are online, for sure you can type in your questions and we will read them out loud. We will also attempt, if you raise your hand, I think we can unmute you and hear you in the room, but I can't guarantee it. But we definitely want folks who are online to be able to ask questions. So if we can get them unmuted so they can ask out loud, we will do that as well. So I'm going to take my microphone over here where I can also see online. Okay, we're just, for the folks online, we're moving, a question? Oh, go ahead, so, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
No,
Mayor.
thanks, Amy. I was trying to take some notes, and I've got a few questions, but I guess I just want to frame for a minute. We all are most concerned, I think, in the community, we want to make sure the site's entirely safe for people working there today, as I know you do. We are particularly concerned with the migration off-site, right? And our desire that when you're done with this near-term set of aggressive treatments and the catcher's mitts in place, that we'll all have a confidence level that much as technologically possible in the near term has been removed from the site, then there'll be ongoing treatment as appropriate and needed, and that the catcher's mitt technology is going to help prevent anything more from migrating off and feeding the plume, right? So that's, I think that's, without oversimplifying, that's kind of what's in my mind, I think, as we look at all this. So a few questions based on what was presented. On the catcher's mitt itself, am I right in understanding that the work done to date on site has been to install wells that will now be used to test groundwater? No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said on site. Along Tozer, the wells that you've installed to date along Tozer.
So we did not. There we go. So we did not install wells along Tozer yet. This most recent work was driving down and grabbing, not samples, but in-place measurements and giving us an indication of where concentrations are high in that zone. So we will be going out next and installing some wells and installing a couple wells and grabbing just grab samples without a well to help us with design purposes. The wells that we are installing will be used for monitoring purposes, for evaluating what's coming into the catcher's mitt and what's on the other side of the catcher's mitt. And there will be some additional wells also being installed for that purpose. There are existing wells along Tozer Road that we could use for monitoring, but what we are doing is looking at, well, where are those screen intervals versus to where we see the contaminant levels seem to be the highest, and we want to target monitoring wells for the areas where the contamination is the highest. So there will be monitoring, and there will be some more wells going in.
Okay, so to date, it's been taking samples.
Just-
How will you ensure that the length of the catcher's mitt along Tozer encapsulates the whole of the migration, so you don't miss something beyond the outer limits in either direction.
Yep, so that's a great question. So out on the boards out there, there's an example of what we see in the measurements from those probes that we just drove down. And we only have one example out there, and the example that we gave is one of the highest concentration areas. But we also, as we move further south down Tozer Road, we're not really seeing anything showing up on those probes. So we use that information to gauge what we think is happening, and then we go in and we do this confirmation sampling to make sure that what those probes are telling us is consistent with what's actually in the groundwater there. So we're looking at what have the historic migration patterns been, and that's where we're going to be putting the barrier, the catcher's mitt.
If I could just, because I think it's really important. Ray, you talked about there were two hotter spots, right, on the far north and then the far south. And if you could tell us what those levels were that made them red rather than blue. And I'm just wondering, what you did is that you drilled wells along Tozer that used this, is it electrical conductivity, to kind of figure out what the contaminant level might be in the area. It's not water sampling, but I think it's conductivity, right? Or is that, or some other way, some other mechanical, physical way of determining whether there's solvents or whatever in the.
Yeah, so you've asked, I think, two different things.
I'm going to put them together in that. Are we seeing anything to indicate that at the north and at the far south, we are tending to get higher levels even with the conductivity tests?
So-
or it's not showing that profile?
Yeah, so I want to clarify, these red dots are not the highest concentrations. The red dots are areas where concentrations over the last 8 monitoring periods or so have not gone down or are not stable, so they might be coming up. So it could be, and I don't know offhand what the number is up there, it could be that it was low, but it's starting to get a little bit higher. So that's all that. So that doesn't mean that that's the highest concentration, okay?
Well, I guess what I was getting at is, we're indicating that it looks like we're going down in the middle, but we still have elevations.
Yes.
The north and the south, and I'm just wondering if, in line with the mayor's question about the effectiveness of the catcher's mitt, we do have a confidence level here that, since we're seeing at the far north and the far south, the elevation levels, we're gonna catch them in the mid.
That's right. So I don't anticipate, so I have my thoughts on how the length that I think this is going to be. And what I'll tell you is this up here, that what we're seeing does not appear to be getting down to Tozer Road. This is much more limited, and where we're seeing those high concentrations, that's going to be dealt with the SBGR. All right. This one here at the north, we've got the thermal treatment, but the catcher's mitt is also going to extend up in this area here. So both of those areas where we're seeing some increasing in concentrations, and again, it's not the hot spot, but we see an increase is going to be addressed with the remedies that we are installing.
Thank you. You were good with that. You didn't blow up my line of questioning at all. That was good. I have a lot of questions, but I just want to maybe ask one more and then turn it over to other folks. On the, based on what I said a few minutes ago, which I think is kind of broadly what we're all looking for here, remove what's there to the extent technologically feasible, continue to go at it, prevent anything more from migrating off. To that, the temporary solution statement, I was a little concerned, Laurent, with some of the language you were using. And so I wonder if we could just spend a couple more minutes on that, because you talked about foreseeable future, and I forget some of the wording you used, but it was a little, maybe the best way for me to say is a little less committed than we're going to prevent any further migration off this site to replenish a plume ever, because that's what we need. We can't have something work for a little while and then fall back.
Yeah, no, if I implied we were doing less than we've previously said we would, it was, I shouldn't have done that. The idea is to achieve a permanent solution, to make sure that the concentration will decrease and that there will be no significant risk now and into the future. So if I somehow implied otherwise, that was purely by improper language.
Foreseeable future is the regulatory language, that's why he's using that. You might want to state that, so they can-
Yes.
There you go.
So foreseeable future, that's a term that to we lay people is really troubling because it doesn't suggest that we're going to have a solution that the community, the neighborhood, and the community can count on long term. I'm sorry, you folks are the DEP folks tonight. Do you want to say anything more about foreseeable future? Because it's not a term we use scientifically. You do.
Well, what do you foresee about the future?
I think Matt should probably answer
yes.
what foreseeable future says in the regulations. If each person could just introduce themselves for the sake of the people online too, when you start to speak, that'd be great.
Matt Hackman, LSP. So the difference between a temporary solution and a permanent solution is that the temporary solution says there's no substantial hazard, which means we're not experiencing risk, and for at least maybe 5 years, I think is the current term that we talk about. Sorry, 5 years, right? So we know that we're good for 5 years while we're working on cleaning up all the rest of it. The no significant risk means that there is no significant risk for as far as we can foresee into the future. No one can tell what is going to happen in the year 3000. But for the farthest as we can see in the future, the idea is there will be no significant risk once all this remediation is complete. Okay? And that's typically at least 30 years forward and or more.
And there's also mechanisms in place if there is a significant risk
Right.
that we're still liable for that.
Yeah.
That our liability does not go away. And I assure you, if you're worried about us finding a loophole to back out of this, absolutely not. We're absolutely committed to this being a no significant risk category in perpetuity.
It's like forever.
I don't think we're feeling that we're in a bad faith place right now with the Varian and Jacob's team. It's just that language is troubling, and so we know you're here now, and we know you're going to be working at it. I think what I was hearing about the temporary is you're allowed to work at this pace and in this way because the data shows that in the near term, things are okay while you're doing it?
For everyone in the community, for everyone working here, for all the site workers that are going to be doing this work, right? So the remaining contamination is it is located beneath the ground in the soil, groundwater, and bedrock that people are not exposed to. However, as you point out, and as we've pointed out, it remains a source. And so what we want to do is eliminate that source so that there can be no contamination or migration or exposure in the future.
So just to add to that, there is a specific requirement for Varian to submit either a permanent or a temporary solution by that date in February. So we're not ready to submit a permanent solution. So we needed to submit the temporary solution, which, as we've said, we're talking tonight, means the site's safe, but we're not done, and we're implementing these remedies that will achieve and that we believe will achieve a permanent solution in the future.
So the temporary solution is an interim measure, allows the terminology of foreseeable future, but the permanent solution doesn't use that language.
It's current risk versus future risk. There is no current risk, but we. Sorry, this isn't my area of expertise. Karen Stromberg, DEP Public Involvement Coordinator. The idea is that the site is posing no current risk to anybody, but that's not okay. We want to ensure that the site isn't going to pose a risk to anybody in the future. And that's why we're doing more to make sure that doesn't happen.
And I would just say further, sir, this no significant risk for the foreseeable future is the standard across all of the MCP. That's for every site. It's the same deal.
So
Contamination cleaned up.
yeah. So Mayor, it sounds like I think you're comfortable with what we're doing. It's the language, and the language, we're just being precise in using the MCP language.
Barrett Smith with Sage Environmental, here for the city of Beverly. I just had a couple of kind of big picture questions to echo on the mayor's points as we kind of move into a temporary solution kind of mode. I really wanted to say thanks to Raymond and to Laurent for taking me out to the site about a month ago. We did a thorough walkover of the whole site, and they obviously took time out of their very busy days to, in their implementation of this very aggressive remedial program. That was much appreciated. But seeing the site firsthand helps a lot. When you're looking at site plans, it's not always easy to pick up on some details. These guys have heard me say this before. The big thing that jumped out at me in looking at the Stream A SEEP mats is that the mats are actually on the western side of the stream, not on the eastern side. And, my conceptual model of the site would have said that, the mats would be on the side of the stream closer to the facility. Obviously, the data are what they are, the seeps are where they are, and the mats were placed where they are because of where the seeps are. But I find it a little bit concerning that, it's a little counterintuitive to think that we would be having those concentrations coming into the stream from the western side. I know we put a piezometer in on the west side to look at groundwater conditions close to the stream there. I know we were monitoring the stream on a fairly routine basis. I guess one question that comes to my mind is, would it be prudent to put a piezometer or two on the eastern side, just to have a sense of, what's happening as groundwater is approaching the stream and, moving into the hyporheic zone, just so we can understand, what stream conditions might look like, in the future. I guess that was point number one. It's a question for the team. Question number two, I guess, again, relates to sort of the big picture and moving out of a RAM mode and into a temporary solution mode, and that would be the groundwater monitoring program. I think it's important to continue to keep a close eye on groundwater conditions out in the neighborhood, with the P21 well triplet being of particular concern to me. And, given that we know that we, have had some indication of vapor intrusion, at least at one residence, it would be great to know, I'd love to see a Mann-Kendall analysis on the PC 21 wells as soon as we have enough data to do that. And those are, that's really it, I guess. So, if we continue to monitor the P21 triplet, Stream A, SCDS, GDS3, and STR19, sort of on the ongoing semi-annual kind of program, I think that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think in terms of that part of it, I think that's the intention. And, a lot of those wells have been in the annuals or twice a year, so
Yep.
biannual sampling. And like you said, once we have enough data, because but to do this Mann-Kendall analysis, you have to have a certain number of data points to do it. So once we have that number of data points, we can certainly look at a Mann-Kendall evaluation of that. The other part about the stream, and I forgive me, I forgot to mention the pipe that we found that seems to be channeling water to that side of the stream. We are planning to do a video inspection of that. We have been getting tons of rain, and I'm sure that pipe is completely full, and running a camera up it, we're not going to see a lot. So, once some of this rain has subsided, we're going to be able to take a look at that, and that may give us some information as to what, that artificial flow in that pipe. as far as the additional piezometer on the east side of the stream, we'll take a look at that. We'll talk with Varian and see if that makes sense.
You want to talk about the bedrock formation, how it?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you and I
understand,
talked
yeah,
about
the bedrock high there, and that may be
Yeah.
part of the issue.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
I just, seeing that configuration just made me
Yeah, and
question, like, do we really have a handle on what's
Yeah.
happening here?
Yeah, and there are some wells on the east side of that stream. They're just not right next to it like that piezometer.
Do you want to quickly explain what a man-candle analysis is? You can do that better. Or otherwise I will. But, oh, Carol, perfect. Simply said, when you have groundwater data, several rounds, 8 rounds, several years, sometimes it's greater, sometimes it's smaller. It's not, it's more of a wave. And you run a statistical test on them to determine, based on the data you see, whether it's going up as a whole or going down. You don't want, in this type of, because of seasonal variation and other sampling circumstances, you don't want to necessarily take two values and say it's increasing or decreasing. You have to take the long road and look at overall trend. It's not unlike stock.
And, okay, well, I was just going to add something in the response. So we're focusing on the source areas, and we're having the catcher's mitt, but it's important that everybody realize that there are horses that are out of the barn, right? So those things that are already beyond Tozer Road are beyond Tozer Road, and it's just really going to be monitoring, and it just takes time as clean groundwater comes through to flush its way out for the contaminants to go away, right? It just gets some dilution by clean water, and it just takes time for that. So I just don't want anybody thinking that, oh, that stuff along the stream is going to be cleaned up like that once this is done. It takes time.
And Will had a question, which is, what's a piezometer? And simply said, it's the same thing as a monitoring well. Not everybody will disagree, but it's pretty much the same thing.
A couple of things. If you could just give us a little more detail here. Here's what I understood you said, Ray, was that there is a monitoring well above the mats, right, in which you're testing groundwater at what level? Surface level? Deep?
Shallow, yeah.
Okay. Which would be the analog to the natural seep that we have there, right, to see what's being upwelled from the groundwater. You have the mat,
And just
go
to,
ahead.
the concentrations in the pipe are a little higher than what
When
we
we say
see
the
in that.
pipe, to explain to people
Sure.
what you mean by the pipe.
So there's two mats here. There's one mat here and there's one mat here. This was the seep that was more prevalent.
Right.
When we installed this mat, we found that there was a drain pipe in here that was probably the source of we know it's the source of the water coming out of the embankment.
Really? Oh.
And I think we talked about this, maybe
Yeah,
we weren't at the
yeah,
last meeting.
yeah.
But the concentrations in that pipe, once we found the pipe, we took a sample of water, because water was flowing out of that pipe. We took a sample of that water. It was very similar to what we saw in the seep itself.
Yeah.
So that's one concentration. Then next, we didn't want to put a piezometer right behind that because it would be artificially what's in the pipe. So we put a piezometer, behind this mat. So that's more local shallow groundwater, and that concentration is actually less than what we see in that pipe.
So you just tell me, what were the levels in the pipe? Were they in the hundreds?
I want to say they were in the hundreds, similar to what we
Similar
saw.
fingerprint?
Yeah.
And so how about the piezometer well there?
I want to say they were in the 30 to 50 range or something like that.
So that's interesting. So are we, do
So
we
this
have the
pipe is-
terminus of the source area of the pipe?
We don't know that yet, and that's why we want to run this camera up
Yeah.
and track it. But we want to be able to see in that pipe.
So
you know.
maybe maybe it's collecting a larger area of the upwelling water,
Correct.
presumably, and
Yeah.
that's why it's so concentrated.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it's
It is, and right.
right where the seep was, the original seep that we had,
And-
where all the orange-looking soil were.
Right, and just
yeah, go
add one
ahead.
point to that, Laurent, fresh my memory. I think the levels we see in the pipe were similar to what was seen in the Brown and Caldwell data at depth. So what might be occurring is recall, we had this point made a few minutes ago where there's a very deep bedrock in the soccer fields. As you go across the stream and towards Hill Street, the bedrock comes way up and is like at 6 feet.
Right.
So what might be happening is there could be a bedrock high right here that's part of what's going on and causing that that flow
Well,
up.
and I think that the data is pretty strong that it is showing that bedrock high, which makes everything, make sense that
Yeah.
you would have, pressure pushing for those, pressure pushing the deeper groundwater, presumably which is more contaminated, up to the shallow
Yeah.
area, which resulted in that, like spring-like formation,
Right.
what we're calling the seep. Okay, and that all makes sense. So, so I do applaud our, dealing with that area, because
Yep.
I do believe that the major reason we're seeing the upwelling, of course, is the bedrock high. But what I'm curious about is that you said that you do have it in the dozens, I guess, rather than the hundreds, in the pipe that is the analog to what this groundwater that's being upwelled.
And we've only sampled that new well once. So, and my recollection is it's in the 30s compared
Okay.
to like 200.
In the hundreds, right,
Yeah.
okay. But you also said that the sampling on the brook, stream, whatever, up and
Yep,
below.
upstream and
okay,
below.
is showing the same levels.
That we've
as we got
seen. Mm-hmm.
Previously, which was probably consistent with the fact is we have a gaining stream there, right? And we're probably getting contribution
Yep.
from the shallow groundwater that is coming up into the
Yep.
stream. So
Yeah,
which
this
is-
this is not the only spot where groundwater is getting into the stream.
Yes, correct,
This has
right.
been shown to be a gaining stream. We've
Right,
known
but
that.
those levels in the stream, just so everybody understands, are dramatically, substantially different
Yep.
than the levels we've been talking about.
Correct.
They're ones and twos and threes. They're
Correct.
very small levels, but they're there.
Yep.
So, bottom line for me, as I listen to all this, is that removing the site as a source, as the mayor has been very clear about,
Mm-hmm.
to me is our greatest solution to this migration overall that's coming into the area.
Absolutely. Yep.
The seep itself is a localized problem.
Correct.
And I do believe, I am convinced based so far, unless you think there's some data saying otherwise, that the program that you have there to capture it, so there can be no physical contact with anyone in that area like there was before. You can't come in contact with, there's no more seep coming up that you could, have a physical connection with, obviously, if you take care of this pipe thing. So I feel confident that we have removed what was, I would think, the greatest danger to people in the area. And the other danger, to the extent there is a risk with the seeping from the stream, I do have confidence that removing the site as a source will remove that. So is there anything that I just said inconsistent with what you're seeing out there? Am I missing something, or does that seem
No, I would
consistent?
agree. I mean, these mats are covering and providing limited access to where those seeps were, so that's been addressed. The levels in the stream have been evaluated by a risk assessor and shown not to be a significant risk.
Right.
And you're right, the upstream stuff is gonna take care of concentrations. Whether it's
If we want to get rid of the stuff in the stream.
Exactly.
And what we're doing
Yeah.
at the site, we have great confidence is going to actually deal, and is the only real way we can really deal with that problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joan Lovely, State Senator. Just building on what Jan was saying, just about that outflow pipe, because I don't get the visual of where it's going, what direction it's going. I can see a building in the background of that photo, but I don't know what that is, and maybe you could show an overview of where that pipe's going.
So we're talking down here.
Yeah, I'm going to look
North is up.
I'll look at this one because it's.
Sure.
Go ahead.
North is up.
Yeah.
Route 128 is along here. Tosia Road is down through here.
Yeah.
This is Patton Field, Longview Terrace, Longview Drive, Sonning. So the seep is on the west side, so this side of the stream, further away from where the site is. So as Barrett said, you would think that if something was coming to the stream from the site, it would be coming on the east side of the stream, but that's not what we're seeing. And what we see is an area of very deep bedrock right here, and very shallow bedrock. So it's got a slope that's helping to push that up. And then we have an old pipe from when this was a farm, you know, in the 40s, that is collecting groundwater and sending it towards that stream. At least that's what we believe is going on. And we want to get in there and look at that one pipe, which is on that west side of the stream. And that pipe may be 50 feet long. We don't know how long that is, and it's probably not in very good condition given how long it's been there. So that picture we were showing was standing on the west side of the stream east side of the stream looking west. You were seeing some of the homes over here on Longview Terrace or Longview Drive. I'm not sure which one those were on. Does that help orientate you a little bit?
Yeah, it's helpful. Can you go back to the plume picture?
With the dots?
With the dots, yeah. So the plume, I told some of you I have a history with this neighborhood because my best friend grew up right here on Sonning, right there, because this is the commuter rail. And we used to sneak under the bridge and come over here and go over to Friendly's for our butterscotch sundaes. So we were always in here, but she grew up right here. And in her house, you know, her little sister died when she was 9, I want to say, in the 70s. And then the next family that bought that house also had a cancer death of a teen. And I'd never seen this plume. And I sat back there and went, oh, wow, that plume went right over there. I never knew that. Whether it's related to the Varian contamination or not, we'll never know. It's just very coincidental. But anyway, just long history here. Spent a lot of time there when I was a kid and a teenager. And so thanks for that particular picture. That was helpful for me just to fill that in. And that's it. Thank you.
I want to be very clear, in my mind, I think I am, about why we are seeing the seep area on the west side as the high level. You know, there was these comments about, well, it's not coming on the Varian side. But what's going on here, my understanding, and you correct me, is that we're not dealing with a shallow water problem, because the site is way up on a hill, far away, and the contamination is going down deeper into the groundwater as it comes down off that hill, and as it's plateauing and coming into the neighborhood, the highest levels of contamination, the one I believe is accounting for the high levels we see on the west, is because it's at the deeper levels, and then the bedrock protrusion that's coming up near the surface is causing the pressure to get that deeper contamination up onto the west side. So the Varian site is, in my mind, of course, the source of that contamination. I don't want people to confuse it, because the west side of the stream, where the Varian site is, can still be the site. It can be the source of the contamination on the west of the stream, because of the upwelling of the deeper groundwater that's coming from the site. Right? We all agree on that, right? There's no difference of
that's
opinion about
quite potentially what is occurring, you know.
Right.
And part
Right.
of what Barrett's question is, you know, there are some additional things that we could do to understand that a little bit better, and that's why he
to
said-
see if there's a shallow component that is, sure, and I applaud that, but I think that the data is very strong about the bedrock pressure. So the pipe thing really raises all sorts of questions, but presumably it is gathering a lot of the water in one area.
Right.
I wonder what the pipe was ever used for, or whatever.
we may never know. I mean,
But you're going to get to the bottom of that when you pull that.
yeah, we're going to do a video. We're probably going to go up that pipe some distance and then find this big root ball that has collapsed that pipe.
Yeah.
And then we need to decide, well, is there anything additional we do to
And whether it's perforated
pipe.
and it's allowing in for infiltration in the pipe itself, or it's just because it's old, it's allowing for intrusion along the large expanse of the pipe. Or
It's clay. Yeah, and that area there is a wooded area, and there's all sorts. I mean, we've walked back there. There's all sorts of old building materials. I mean, there's just, you know,
Yeah.
wheelbarrows, just strange elevations. So it may be, I mean, right now,
Yeah.
from a standpoint of making sure, it sounds like everybody's in agreement that the primary concern is we don't want anybody to have contact with this water. And right now, we've sufficiently done that. And so it's the devil we know versus the devil we don't. We may investigate this and determine that the best course of action is to leave it the way it is, right? And we just don't know yet because that area it's a bit complicated.
Thank you. Hannah Bowen, one of the city councilors here, and just had a few clarifying questions. Some of my questions have been covered. The first was actually on the plume map and sort of how the temporary solutions statement is evaluated. So this sort of defined boundary, was curious, first of all, about the little dots that are outside the, sort of not contiguous with the rest of the plume, and how you determine that area and how contamination would get there. And then secondly, sort of building off the conversation around the stream and some continued new discoveries, how we're able to evaluate that the plume is fully defined, and where identification of just further details and whether concentrations are increasing, stable, or decreasing, since that data is still coming in or to be discovered, how that fits with having filed a temporary solution statement.
Sure. So just so we understand that the few dots that we show are only a handful of wells. There are other wells outside of that purple area that show non-detect concentrations. So part of what we do is look at the entire site. And then we pick some key wells at some key locations at different intervals to kind of cover, shallow bedrock and that deeper overburden to evaluate that. So that's one part of that. And the other, does any question on that, or?
Well, yes, just I wasn't so much thinking why some dots were shown on that screen, but why some areas are identified as a portion of the plume that are not connected to the rest of the plume.
Yep, and you're, in particular, you're probably talking about this one dot.
Yeah, the
here.
one in the neighborhood.
So, yeah, so that's in this area that we're talking about where the bedrock comes up. So we have wells either side of that show non-detect concentrations, and then there's some levels that we see at this well, and that's probably part of what we're seeing with that upwelling that's occurring that we've been talking about here. So, part of it is also, we don't have a well right here, so potentially it is connected, but we have enough wells to make some good judgment calls, and we use a model to do that. That helps to fill in those blanks. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. I guess I was seeing that groundwater plume boundary as part of the temporary solution statement as saying these are all the areas where we have identified contaminants had migrated to or through. So maybe it's less clearly defined than that.
Well, I want to add is to the west of this, you have additional well where it's shown as non-detect, and therefore you can say, well, this is the end of the plume. It's not going any further, broadly speaking. So in this particular case, that purple line to the west is a limit, and we know there's no VOC present in wells further west. We're not saying we don't know what's there. It's we have to eliminate it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a phase 2 comprehensive site assessment.
Got it.
If we had a Sharpie, we would draw it, I would draw it.
Yeah.
Purple and grabs that thing because I believe it said bedrock. So I think we have a little disagreement about the fact that we are missing a little connection there.
Yes, and for the folks who are listening online, I think just making the same point that little dot that's hanging out there, I think maybe some of us would feel more comfortable if the plume boundary included that as part of a whole site, maybe the one up north too. But that's probably nitpicking. So other clarifications I was hoping for on the Tozer Road barrier, appreciated the discussion earlier on that. Was just curious a little bit more on the timelines and how they overlap. I know the plan is to have that completed before the late fall starting of Building 3 treatment, but after the PSL 10 treatment starts, and after a lot of the drilling has already been underway for the Building 3 treatment. So if you could just kind of reassure us that the drilling is not activating further migration before the catcher's mitt is in place, and how we're making sure that all those timelines line up.
Sure. One thing to think about is that, these VOCs can travel in groundwater, but it's not very fast. We've talked a number of times about this site has what we call a dense till, and the groundwater just doesn't move fast through it. So, and I don't remember the travel times, but it's in terms of months for it to get down the hill. So our goal is to have that barrier in place as soon as possible. For sure, when we really start doing aggressive treatment, the drilling can liberate some things, and we're doing monitoring now. That's partly why we did the monitoring in the fall, and we're going to do another monitoring this spring. In May, we have an event scheduled, so there's going to be some continuing monitoring, and we'll have an eye on some of that information as we move forward.
Great, thank you.
I can add, I think I understand your question is the beginning of operation of PSL 10, could that result in remobilization that would not be captured by the barrier wall since it's not built yet? And the answer is we're not so concerned by the PSL 10 system. It's really the thermal treatment when you start heating the ground where the concentration are more elevated, where there's the potential by essentially starting to release this elevated concentration that this could remobilize. I don't think we really consider that there would be a potential for remobilization near PSL 10 because the concentration are smaller, and the process itself that's taking place at PSL 10 is not, we're not heating, we're just doing a sophisticated bioremediation.
And I've told our TIBs I probably nagged them enough times saying that can't turn on until Tozer Road's in.
Perfect. I appreciate the nagging.
And to follow on to that, though, when we look at the thermal treatment systems, their overall operation is structured so that there's a net inward extraction of groundwater vapor. So if we think about a system in the ground where Building 3 is now, picture a giant vacuum cleaner taking that vapor and taking groundwater out. So, the best analogy would be a vortex where everything is coming together and all the groundwater from around that treatment zone that's not being heated, it's not being treated, it's not part of that remediation system's operation is flowing in laterally. And to the extent that we can pull groundwater up from the rock, the bedrock below, that contaminant migration pathway down to Tozier Road, we'll also be doing that to make sure there's a net upward gradient. So a bunch of technical terms here, but the idea really behind is when that thermal system is operating, heating, and treating, you've got localized low pressure both from a vapor perspective and from a water level perspective that is focusing contaminant movement and capture within that heated zone.
Great. Thank you. Another clarification on the sort of hiccup with the asbestos containing material. Is there any information from Varian or tenant since about kind of how that got there and what else might be expected on the site?
I think you probably, broadly speaking, you're looking at just how things were done back in the days, more than, whoever owned the site did something bad. I think it was just state of the practice back in the days.
Yeah, there's
Fair enough, and I wasn't implying that there was any intentional thing there, but just is there more information to, proactively think about, are there other, areas around the site that might have had construction material left behind, thinking particularly of worker safety, and I know that's a priority for everyone. So
I think the idea is we address as we find it. I suspect we would be digging the greater Boston area if we had to start to assess the asbestos containing material.
Yeah, and it's-
I guess my question was like, is there anyone who has records of when that construction was done, or any way to just get a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a fair question. It's clear from what we're seeing that this is just, appears to be just junk fill that was used. I mean, nobody would, when they built the building decades ago, this is not an indication of recent construction. I don't believe there's been any significant construction activity in that area since the construction of the building, which tells me that's, we're looking at the 1950s probably. And it's really not that, it's pretty typical to use junk fill. I mean, it's unfortunate, but, and to Laurent's point, we're not going to go probing around looking for more asbestos containing materials, since when we think about asbestos, it's not like other contaminants in that it's not creating a plume of any sort. So if it's undisturbed, that's really the best case scenario.
Okay. So we're not worried about like the PSL 10 area or anything like that.
Well, I'm always worried about everything.
I will say the PSL 10 area actually has historically been excavated. In other words, that was a hill, and they dug that up and put it in other places as fill. So it's more likely that they took soil out of there. But you never know what you're going to find. And, it's like Laurent said, there's a lot of asbestos fill in a lot of Massachusetts, and finding it in just one small place is actually unusual. If you find it in one place, it's usually all over the place. So we haven't found it yet. I mean, this is the only place, so that tells me that it probably wasn't very widespread that they used it, but you never know.
And also one last thing on that is that when it was identified, it was immediately recognized. It wasn't confirmed until they sent it out for sampling, but these folks are great, and the drillers that we have out there, I myself, had I come across in my backyard, I would not have initially thought, oh, this is probably asbestos-containing material, because it just looks like boards. But I'm grateful that they immediately saw it, they stopped work. And so to answer your question, I wouldn't be surprised if we find it somewhere else. We'll follow the same protocol. They'll stop work, and we'll let Mass DEP know and follow that same procedure.
Sounds good. Thank you. And I think my last question is just now that, there was the deadline for submitting either a temporary or permanent solution, temporary solution statement is in, is there an update on when we might be looking at a permanent solution based on, the updated timelines of treatment schedules?
Well, what I can say is that I won't speak for anybody, but I know that the most important thing is that we're moving forward. I can't predict when we're going to be at a state of having a permanent solution. I can say that all the treatments, the primary treatments that we see on that board up there, which were proposed in the Phase 4 implementation plans, all of them are scheduled to be implemented this year. And a great many of them will actually be operational, including the thermal system, which we're looking at late fall for turning that on. So our biggest concern, Varian's biggest concern, and when we've spoken to Mass DEP, they want us to keep moving forward, and we are moving forward very aggressively. I won't speak to when I think we'll be at a permanent solution. My priority is just to continue to move forward at the rate we are.
Okay, thank you. And maybe that's something we can hear from Mass DEP in the comment period, sort of if there are expectations around that from the DEP side.
No, we have not had any questions specifically online. They have made some comments that some of this discussion they found very helpful. We have, I think, about 3 or 4 people hanging with us online, and I appreciate that. We have any other questions in the room? I think we've had a really great discussion. I really appreciate your time. If you didn't have a chance to look at the posters when you're coming in, and you hear that it's pouring outside, you can try to wait 5 minutes and take a look at the posters and before you run out to your car. There may still be cookies. There's probably some cold decaf coffee. But I encourage you to take a look at the posters because they do include some of our construction photos that we didn't pack into the presentation. Carol already referred to, you can see some of the data, an example of the type of data we get from that investigation that has been going along Tozer Road. So there's some information there that was not presented in the presentation. I just want to remind you that the public comment period does run through the 23rd of April. Lots of different ways to submit your public comments. And if you didn't already sign in, please do so and check that box that says you're willing to get email, if you are willing to get email. And thanks for coming out. I appreciate it.